journalists covering more local and more regional news in communities around the country. Quality journalism in every community is an important public good that holds people in power accountable, improves the health of our democracy, and keeps our communities engaged and informed. That's healthy for us. Now, regional, local, and community-based journalism is hurting right now. And I'm deeply concerned about what this means for not just the people of my home state of California, but across the country. I understand and agree with the concerns about the lack of competition in the online advertising market, as several members of the committee have expressed, and the inability of small publishers to fairly negotiate with the large technology companies that serve as gatekeepers, in a way, to online information. So I thank Senator Klobuchar for driving attention to this important issue, and I thank her for accepting some of the changes that I requested involving public accountability, reflected in the manager's amendment. But I continue to have three major questions when it comes to the bill. Will this bill actually result in more journalists covering more regional and local news? If that's the intent, does this bill achieve that? Second, how will this bill help or hurt our efforts to combat hate speech and disinformation online that have poisoned our discourse in recent years, as Senator Kennedy has lamented? And I agree. And also, what broader implications or unintended consequences will this bill have on the future of the open internet? And I'll give an example here in just a minute. But when it comes to the first question about labor and the entire premise of the bill, my bottom line again is we need to ensure that workers actually benefit, and not just the hedge funds and other wealthy owners that have bought up so many local newspapers and are stripping them bare. Yes, local newspapers across the country owned by hedge funds. I recognize that there's many good employers amongst California news outlets who will benefit from this bill. So we can't assume that every eligible news outlet covered under this bill is a bad employer. Each employer in California, across the country, has a unique, earned reputation for how much they invest or do not invest in their employees and in their communities. So I think we need to be very careful about potentially facilitating a massive wealth transfer to unscrupulous media owners. Mr. Chairman, this committee received just yesterday a letter from presidents of the News Guild CWA locals and leaders of the Guild bargaining units representing unionized journalists. In that letter, they said, and I'll quote, "We have no confidence that these massively consolidated publishers will use whatever revenues they collect from JCPA to invest in journalists rather than more mergers, stock buybacks, overpaid executives, and union-busting lawyers, because that's how these companies spend the revenues they already extract from our members' journalism." So, Mr. Chairman, I ask consent to enter this letter into the record, as well as a letter from the executive director of the local independent online news publishers echoing these concerns.
Without objection.
Thank you. So, colleagues, if the workers who deal with these conglomerates are skeptical that any money gained from this bill will actually go towards employees, then this committee should be skeptical too. And that's why I filed amendments to address this. We're not at the amendments point yet, but I'll take them up at the appropriate time. Secondly, I'm deeply concerned that the bill will be used and abused by bad actors to disincentivize platform efforts to moderate harmful content such as hate speech or misinformation and disinformation. And I filed a number of amendments to mitigate these concerns as well. As written, the bill creates an ample opportunity to not only compel a covered platform to host their content, but also forces them to pay for it. And if that isn't bad enough, the bad faith digital journalism providers will be able to threaten to sue platforms for taking steps to enforce their community standards. I encourage everyone to take a good close look at Section 6A2. Under this section, if Gateway Pundit or Newsmax joins a joint negotiation entity and a covered platform wants to limit the visibility of some of their posts or flag them for containing false information about how and where to vote, just one random example, the platform risks new legal exposure under the bill as currently written. Any purveyor of hate speech or election disinformation eligible under the bill won't actually need to win in court to be successful. Simply the threat of a lawsuit would serve as a disincentive for platforms to act to address disinformation. The new legal exposure created by the bill will chill efforts to address the spread of misinformation and disinformation at a time when we should be urging platforms to do more, not less, just as many of us have been calling for. And I'm not alone in my concerns. A coalition of nonprofit organizations and associations sent this committee a letter warning that this bill, and again, I'll quote from the letters, forces platforms to negotiate for payments and to carry the content of any digital journalism provider that qualifies to be a part of a joint negotiation regardless of how extreme their content. This is a direct assault on a bedrock principle of content moderation on the internet and will increase the amount of networked information, hate speech, and harassment found there. Another letter by Tech Freedom and signed by 15 academics says, once again I'll quote, absent amendment, the bill will be weaponized against moderation of hate speech, misinformation, and various other forms of online content that are corroding our democracy. And yet another letter warns, the bill may help sites like Infowars and One American News Network demand access and even payment from the covered internet platforms, even if they carry or promote hate speech or disinformation. On the letters I just referenced, Mr. Chairman, I ask consent to have them entered into the record.
Without objection.
Okay. Colleagues, these are serious issues. And having administered elections prior to joining the Senate, I've seen up close how important it is to get the issues right when it comes to protecting our democracy. And lastly, I take very seriously the concerns that have been raised about what this bill would mean for foundational elements of the internet, including linking and public access to information. We've built the most open and accessible communications infrastructure the world has ever seen. We need to be thoughtful about policies that impose limitations on how sites can link to one another and how consumers can access news or information. So again, I fully support the fundamental goal of ensuring we have more journalists covering regional and local news. And I'd like to see the bill sponsors consider modifying the text before it comes to the floor to more primarily focus on those types of outlets, because that is where our support is most needed. So I commend them again for their work, and I hope that Senators Klobuchar and Kennedy will work with me to address the concerns I've laid out here today before the bill comes to the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Durbin.
Senator Klobuchar.
I want to thank my colleague